Boa tarde. Eu gostaria de agradecer a presença da Briona Nic Dhiarmada. Ela é produtora do filme que nós acabamos de assistir. Ela é professora da Universidade de Notre Dame, no Departamento de Língua e Literatura Irlandesas. E ela também é autora do livro The 1916 Irish Rebellion, e além de diversos artigos sobre o tema. Eu também gostaria de agradecer a presença da Laura Izarra. Ela é professora livre-docente da USP, coordenadora da Cátedra de Estudos Irlandeses e presidente da Associação Brasileira de Estudos Irlandeses. E eu também gostaria de agradecer a presença da Patrícia Moran, diretora do Sinusp. Ela é professora da USP nos cursos de audiovisual e de design e no programa de pós-graduação em meios e processos audiovisuais da ECA. Então, vamos dar início ao debate. Eu vou passar a palavra para a Briona e depois a gente abre para perguntas.
Yeah, you could see there at the end, we did use a lot of archives. And I suppose coming from university, I think that's one of the interesting things about this, was that we had the time. You know, we took 4 years to develop and research this. You know, and for most filmmakers and documentary makers, particularly working for television, for broadcast, you know, you might have 6 months if you're lucky. So we really did take our time to do this. At a very early stage, I realized that, well, I knew a few things. I didn't want any reconstructions. Yeah, they're very hard to get right. They're very hard to look authentic. So we decided to use archival footage where we had it. But of course, for example, in 1916, in the actual, in O'Connell Street, in the GPO, in these places, there is no footage. So what did we do? Because you can see there, what looks sort of like footage, but you're kind of looking at it. We actually used, and we started this, we cheated deliberately. And with Pat Collins, who was one of our directors, we decided to use footage from a drama series that RTE had commissioned and filmed in 1966 on the 50th anniversary. So that's where you see the actual fighting during the week, at least in the GPO, and you can see you can actually see it's not real. You know the frames? You think, what's that? That looks like plastic, and it is plastic. They really did that in 1966. So in a sense, I suppose we were trying to use Dublin also as a palimpsest, you know? So we shot current footage, and it is to say that the past is here, the past is present, the present is past, and the future is hopefully ahead of us. Yeah, so there were lots of decisions that we had to make, obviously in terms of content. We had access to wonderful RTE archives. Back in 1966, on the 50th anniversary, when many of these people were still alive, they were old men and old women. But RTE, they were really forward-thinking, and they interviewed lots of these survivors and family members of the leaders, of the executed leaders. So we had access to all of that. And also, Robert Key did a wonderful 13-part history for the BBC, and he went back and he interviewed survivors as well. He also interviewed British soldiers that had been there in Dublin during the week. So we did use one of them in this. On the 3-part series, you'll see more of that. We have more, obviously you've got more chance to tease things out. And it's really hard to tell the story of Ireland in 86 minutes, you know. How do you compress it? What do you leave in? What do you leave out? So yeah, it was a difficult, and of course it's not film is collaborative, and something like this is extremely collaborative, you know. And we were blessed with our contributors. We had wonderful contributors. A fantastic cinematographer in Colm Hogan, I think he did a great job for us. Rowan McGann, the other director. So a lot of people worked on this, and we were partnered with a television company in Ireland, Coco Television, and we got the finances through. You can see there a list of people who gave us money. Basically, they gave us money to do that. And they trusted that we would do it, and I hope we repay them.
Not now.
Okay.
Another thing that calls that really is the part that moves us all. I think is the music, the way you choose the music into different moments and bringing out this drama, right, that was happening, and then combining with what some of the interviewees that said about being a theater at that moment, that say it was a theatrical performance that brings us this combination of music, moment, the landscape at that moment, and the people themselves.
Yeah, the music, I mean, every time I listen to it, actually, it really, still stirs me. We knew again at an early stage that we needed a score, a newly composed score for this. And we got in touch with Patrick Cassidy, who is based in LA. He's an Irish composer, based in LA. His family have a traditional music background, but he's a classical composer. He's actually a mathematician. That's what he started off as. He actually, someone showed a clip, Ruth showed a clip of Calvary today. Patrick Cassidy actually, he wrote the score for Calvary also. So we worked with him, and he came up with a score which I think is really, really wonderful. I mean, it does what it's meant to do, which is, I suppose, manipulate your emotions, but that's what it is there for. One of the things that I was really pleased with, do you know the song there toward the end, Missha Era? And that is the words of that. It was a poem written by Padraig Pearse. I Am Ireland is a personification of Ireland as a woman, and he reset that. And it's sung there by a young cousin of his, Siobhan Nic Dhiarmada, who is 16 years of age. She's a native Irish language speaker. Her grandparents, one of her grandparents was from the Connemara Gaeltacht in Ireland, in the west of Ireland. Her other grandfather is from the Philippines. So in a sense, and having her sing in this traditional way, a native speaker, Pearse's words with Patrick's new setting, I think it's kind of special. Yeah.
Because even the opening of the film has that poem by John Mitchell. How do you come to choose John Mitchell in this?
With a bit of difficulty, actually. Everyone really wanted to use him there. I was a bit worried because John Mitchell, while he was a great Irish patriot, he was also on the wrong side of the Civil War in America. He was pro-slavery, so you kind of think, the same thing with Thomas Jefferson, you know, so they're of their time. And it just seemed to kind of set the scene for us. Again, it's kind of epic. It's that sort of big, overblown almost, you know. We don't have that in the three-parter, but we do have it for the feature.
But it's very moving also.
Yes, it is. It's a very moving. Yeah.
Please, if you want to ask questions, join us, because this is an informal talk, so please. Yes.
Thanks, Briona. I hadn't seen the theatrical version. I'd only seen the telly version, so it was really nice to see that. And can I just pick up on the music question again? Because as soon as you use Missha Era, you're referencing Missha Era, the film, and you're referencing Shauna Reardon. And I just wondered if you might comment on that.
Of course, yeah. Missha Era, what Ruth has written very well of Missha Era. It was Missha Era itself, as I say, references Pearse's famous poem, but it also is the name of a very, very famous documentary made in 1959 in the Irish language, which traces the revolutionary period. And it's based pretty much, or at least 95% of it, on footage, archive footage, that George Morrison, the filmmaker, gathered in various archives all over Europe. And he put it together with, again, some very famous shots. And we again pay homage there, the waves crashing to the shore and all of that stuff. So again, that is very conscious conceit that we're using, and we are referencing back. Because you can't ignore Missha Era. And of course, though, I think it was they just call it a monument, a celluloid monument to romantic nationalism. You're quoting Harvey, I think, or something. But we've gone beyond romantic nationalism. And so, of course, in that, and even in terms of choosing the music, and talking to Patrick about it, because Patrick does have a background in traditional music. The music to Missha Era, the documentary, is very famous. It was written by Shauna Reardon, who was really revolutionary in bringing classical forms of composition and of settings, bringing traditional music into that. And in a sense, we couldn't do that. We didn't want to do that, obviously. So we thought of other composers, but I felt, no, they'd be too close to that idiom. So we went for literally a film idiom. I mean, it is a score idiom. And that's what we went for with Patrick. But he brought both of those things to the table, I think. It was great working with him. He's a fantastic guy.
Thank you, and thank you for showing us the film. I was wondering about the reception of it. what has it been like? Has it been the same everywhere or different? Or
Do you know, it's been brilliant, actually. We've shown it. It was, because it was the centenary year, okay, it was picked up by the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs. And so they showed it through their embassies and consulates. So basically everywhere there was an Irish embassy, and there are quite a number of them, it was shown there. And I went to quite a number of them as well. So we showed it basically in 5 continents. Things like this: universities, film festivals, screenings organised by the Irish embassies and consulates. And it's been quite remarkable. It's been really remarkable, the reaction. The broadcast version, again, has been, oh my God, I think about 25 different countries have shown it, including Poland, Vietnam. This is public television. So we've got 500 different stations covering it all over the US on PBS. And again, even this year, they took it up for St. Patrick's Day. We had something like 300 stations re-showing it this year. The first place we showed it, this particular version, was, would you believe it, in Argentina, at the Pinamar, Pantel Pinamar. And there was something like 400 people. It was the opening of the festival. It's a European film festival, South American European Film Festival, and Ireland was the country that was being honoured that year. So we showed this as sort of a pre-premiere, and there were 500 people in the audience, and people came up. It was extraordinary. I don't speak any Spanish again, which is my shame. It's like Portuguese, but people came up and they did this and they said "corazón" or "corazón." So it was they were really moved. So because I think this is it's a very specific story, obviously, but it is a very universal story as well, I think. And that's what, you know, that was one of the things that behind history are people. You know, people make history and history makes or breaks people. And I really wanted to get that out as well. You know, with Pearse's letter to his mother, you know, he was this great revolutionary figure, much maligned actually over the past 20 years. He went from being a figure of absolute, you know, treated with piety as almost like a saint, you know, through hagiography in the early years of Irish independence. And then in the last 20, 30 years, he went through a period where he was absolutely demonized and seen as this pedophile, his sexuality, which is not proven at all. But that was brought out in this very, very, he was seen as this bloodthirsty neo-fascist. Now, of course, Pearse said things that we nowadays, we think, and we have it in there. You know, he says we must get accustomed to the sight of blood, and we must use arms and all of this thing. But remember, he's writing this in 1914, 1915. This is common currency. This is a common discourse all over Europe. It's a discourse in Germany, the militarization, this whole idea of the manliness and how you do this. So he wasn't, if we're looking back now in an isolated way, we can say, oh my God, this is, it's repugnant and repulsive what he says. But we can't go back to the past and treat it, I think, through the lens of today. John Redmond, who's often seen as a counterpoint to Pearse. Pearse is the man of violence, and John Redmond is seen as the man of peace. John Redmond is responsible for sending more men to his deaths than Pearse could ever have thought of. All the Irishmen that because of Redmond's promptings went to fight and die in France, fight, die and kill in France and in Flanders. So I think, you know, when we look back at the past, it is definitely a different country. You know, and but also he was a human being. With the mother, with his younger brother. I think that's the poignancy of that. His younger brother Willie, who really had no great importance in the volunteer movement. He simply was Pearse's. He was his aide-de-camp in the thing. He held no real leadership position, and the reason that he was executed really was because of who he was. And even at the time, people felt this was wrong. Whatever you could make about Pearse, and Pearse himself knew he was going to be executed. But he never felt that others would, and particularly he never felt, I suppose, that Willie would. And he mentions them in his last letters home.
So thank you very much, Briona, for screening this in Brazil. I think it was a great pleasure for all of us here.
Thank you for asking me. Thank you all for asking me, Laura.
Yes, no, it's really amazing to have the chance to see it here. And I'd like to ask you actually about your narrative choices, how you chose and how you decided to narrate the story. I think, as you've mentioned already, you kind of chose a very more traditional way of telling 1916 story. And we have nowadays many Irish writers that are revisiting the event, trying to see it from a different perspective. So, for example, Jane O'Neill's At Swim to Boys, or Roddy Doyle's A Star Called Henry, and other books that are going back to the past, and they're trying to find something that relates to the present, or try to see it from gender perspectives, or even other perspectives that are maybe more interesting to our present. So I'd like to know a little bit why or how you had this decision of this more traditional narrative, and if you at any moment thought about narrating it in a different way. And thank you so much again.
Thanks, that's a great question. And in fact, what we're doing with this is it's very old-fashioned. It is. It's classic, old-fashioned documentary. One of the things that BBC have done recently is that they cannot make a documentary without having a presenter. So you'll see a presenter jumping in a boat, jumping here, going on a train, and it's all presenter-led. And I knew that we didn't want that because, for a number of reasons, it dates it, and you're getting one individual. And one of the things with this is that we have so many wonderful contributors. Like what I want, when we avoided opinion holders, right? We went only for historians, because again, one of the reasons, given that we are a university in partnership with a television production company, was that we want to inform, right? So nowadays, of course, historiography and documentary film, I mean, you tend to go down. You tend to go like deep down. You deal with one specificity, women or gender or sexual, or that sort of thing. And there have been wonderful documentaries, particularly on women. There are a number of documentaries made this year that were fantastic. Katrina Crowe made a documentary about the social conditions in Dublin. And these are really wonderful and absolutely necessary. But I think with some, I'm afraid that we sometimes go too far in the fragmentation. And that people are afraid now of sort of a master narrative, but a grander narrative or a more complete narrative, which of course is always provisional as well. You know, what we tried to do there was, I suppose, put back in some of the things that Missha Era left out, and some of the things that were left out in the 1966 sort of glorification, if you like. And even when RTE, when they began to talk among themselves about how they would treat 1916 in 1966, they came to some very definite decisions. It was not to be analytic. You find these in the it was not to be analytic. It was to be emotional. It was only to use commentary from people who were there. So it was very much glorification, hagiography. The hard questions weren't asked. Women, even though we see them there in some of that footage, their stories certainly weren't told, unless, as daughters, like we see there with Nora Connolly O'Brien. It's an incredibly moving interview. So what we decided to do was try and put that back in, so put women back in, not treat them separately. So we didn't do that. They were in there as part of the story when they did things, for example. So also, one of the things we wanted to put back in, which had been left out totally in 1966, was the role of Irish men in the British Army in the First World War. And that very complicated and complex story that we haven't told yet, you know, that we're only beginning to tell, and we are beginning very much to tell it during the last year. Also, the international aspect was something we wanted to bring out. And of course, we're based in America. It's an Irish-American Institute of Irish Studies in America. So that other story I felt hadn't been told really was America, and Irish-American, the Irish diaspora generally. And how it fits in to the anti-colonial movement, the beginnings of anti-colonialism and anti-imperialism. So I didn't want anything to distract from that. As I say, it's kind of almost going against the grain now of kind of what documentary historians do. I was very influenced by Ken Burns. And really what I thought he did was he took this really controversial, still really painful, controversial period in American history, the American Civil War, and he gave it back to the people in a very intimate way, you know. He had 26 hours or something in it. So we had 3 and 86 minutes. But so it was very definite. And then I definitely wanted a narrator. And when I was writing the script, there was only one voice in my head, and that was Liam Neeson. And he'd been Michael Collins, of course. He was the big fella. He's Irish, but he's living in America. He's a film star. He's got the film starry bit, but he's very down to earth. And he agreed to do it for us. And his voice is like someone said they could listen to him reading the phone book, you know. He really has it. He just brings it to another level. You know, we had a guide track on this. And yeah, grand. And then suddenly Nisa went in and we recorded him, and it was just, he brings it somewhere else. You know, he's a fantastic, fantastic narrator. I hope that answers your question.
Briona, you rightly mentioned the European and international context of some of sort of the sentiments and in the context of the First War, and I just wanted to comment on another aspect where that very much applies. I think one of your historians said that what was unique about Ireland was that sort of the cultural awakening became before the political move to unity. And I think that it might actually be a bit of a Hiberno-centric perspective, because actually this is the pattern that a nation or a people defines itself via its shared culture before it sort of, and that enables then articulating the call for political independence or sovereignty or a nation state. You have that all over Europe. And earlier in the 19th century in Germany, in the Baltics, Estonia, all the Baltic states. So I think this is another case where cultural nationalism provides the powerful mobilization tool for then political nationalism to become effective. And Ireland is a wonderful case study. And some of the high-minded idealism, the romanticism of the rising, and also the theatricality that Roy Foster and others commented upon, I think comes out of the energy that the cultural nationalism had provided.
Of course.
I just wanted to say that, and the other thing, you now said it yourself. I mean, Liam Neeson is such a wonderful choice. This soothing, soft, and at the same time very, how shall I say, authoritative voice. And of course, you have Michael Collins telling the story of the fight for independence.
Yeah. Thank you, Jürgen. I completely agree. I think probably what I think it was Kevin Whelan who said that. I think what he had in his mind was anti-colonial revolutions later outside of Europe. But you're quite right, of course. And in fact, the cultural nationalists knew very well. I mean, they wrote about Hungary, obviously, at the political level, but also they knew about Manzini in Italy. So they were very aware of that, very aware of those currents. And you're perfectly right about that.
Hi, I was in Dublin last year, and I visited most of the sites that have been covered in your film. Stephen Green, for instance, and the GPO, and like a tourist, I went through all those places, and I saw the bullet marks, and I read all the plaques and everything that had been done. So now, when I watched your film, it was quite a very different kind of experience for me, because somehow it became more real. The entire experience, my experience of Dublin became much more real today when I watched the film. And I can understand why this is happening, because in the film what you're doing is you are sort of superimposing images of contemporary Dublin with footage from earlier. And your film is doing it in a very seamless kind of way, because when you watch it, you don't seem to sort of, as a viewer, I was not being able to sort of make that distinction. It was seamless. And that is what perhaps allowed me to transport myself back, to 1916 through my visit to Dublin last year. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for that. Yeah. Funny, that's the thing that, that's what we had hoped to achieve, and I think I can't remember, New Zealand or someone said, "Why did you do that? I hate it, you're pulling me out of the story," So people have reacted, mostly though, they've reacted in the way you have, and thank you so much for that comment.
The faces of the people, of the crowd, of the present crowd past, when you put all...
Yeah, and you really see a new Ireland in those shots. They're just random shots on O'Connell Street. And you see the different nationalities, the people of different origins that are now in the streets of Dublin. And it looks a very different place.
I had just a brief comment and also a question. The comment is that earlier today, we had a lecture on the importance of studying humanities. And I think that 1916 is very much the greatest example I can think of the importance of studying the humanities, because it was made by poets and teachers and this kind of people. And also, I was wondering, because I went to Dublin twice, and both times were really short, and I made a walking tour, and they talked about the 1916, but a part of it was in a serious tone, and another part was in a mocking tone. And I also went to QMA and Gale, and there it was all about the serious and stuff, but I was wondering what's the perception of the average Irish person about the 1916, because I've seen such different perceptions.
Yeah, I think it's changed actually dramatically over the years. I mean, I think in the early years of the state, you had very much these were our founding heroes. You didn't question them. You didn't look at the darker side of the rebellion. You didn't mention the fact that there were civilian casualties or children killed or any of that. That wasn't mentioned. They were our heroes. And then, because of the Troubles broke out in Northern Ireland, and suddenly we went from, like, for example, in 1966, there was something like 27 hours of television, or more actually, probably, but certainly more than 27 hours of television on 1916. In 1976, which was a mere 10 years later, there was one program, and it was called Who Fears to Speak? And a lot of people were afraid to speak because, of course, the Provisional IRA claimed 1916 as an inspiration. They were basically finishing off the job that had been started in 1916, hadn't been finished in 1922. So people in the South in particular, and the authorities and many people, they were afraid to touch this. They really didn't want to examine the violent beginnings of our own state. So there was an amnesia, I think. It was two. It was either amnesia or demonization. And it really wasn't until after the peace process that filmmakers in particular, began to be able to look at these things. And in fact, the first documentary, maybe you might enlighten me, Ruth, as to whether there was one before, but the only one that I can remember was 1996. Steve Carson made a biopic, a documentary on Padraig Pearse. And that was entitled Padraig Pearse, A Fanatic Heart. Not a question mark. There was no question mark. And of course, that's a quote from Yeats's poem. And we get this sort of, like, his domineering mother. It was that sort of psychological, faux psychological. But at least we were beginning to look at him. But during the centenary, I think, and people were very scared. I think coming up to the centenary, people in Ireland, the Irish government, the academia, I think people were scared as to what might happen here. Was it going to be taken over by extreme Republicans? Was it going to by Sinn Féin, basically? Yeah, Sinn Féin and others were more extreme, shall we say? And how were people going to? Were people going to hate this word? But were they going to own it? Who was going to own this? And also, what was it going to do in terms of reconciliation and all of those things, all of those questions? So people were really wary. And then it was actually wonderful. I think, and the Irish government gets, we always, it's very easy to batter the government, but I think here, they were actually wonderful. I think what the Irish Diplomatic Service did abroad with this, the programme of commemorations, I think it was really dignified. Anybody who was there at Easter, on Sunday, Easter Monday in Dublin. And what they did was they went back to culture. On the Monday, the Easter Monday, they had all the sort of the military stuff, and again, it was very dignified. On the Sunday, they had all that stuff on the Sunday. And then on the Monday, what they did was they had the RT organised something over 100 cultural events all over the city, where people came and they had reenactments, people dressed up in silly uniforms, but people came to cultural events. And it really, it almost put back to it went back to the cultural root of the revolution. And I think really at the end of it, people felt good about themselves. I went to show this in a school, actually, near where I live. I'd been out in Argentina or somewhere exotic, right? And the local teacher said, would you come in and talk to the senior history students and show them this? And to see those kids, it was really remarkable, because what they said was, do you know, we feel proud to be Irish. We're proud of this, but it doesn't mean we're going to go out and shoot an English soldier or anything like that. But they said they were talking to their parents. Their parents didn't want to know because they were afraid of the North and what was going on, and they were afraid of being associated with violent republicanism. Their grandparents didn't talk about it because you're either on one side of the Civil War or the other side of the Civil War. And they were saying they're the first generation that are now in a modern Ireland, where you do have, at least you have some sort of sense of moving towards a reconciled future, hopefully. But, and that they said they can look at this as history, actually. As history, not something about history and memory, but that they could be proud of this. They could say, because why should they not be? Most states grew out of violent revolutions. We don't have to do we constantly have to go around and saying, we're sorry, we won our freedom through violent revolution. There are very few peaceful revolutions in the world. It's not that's not to say that you're pro-violence or anything, but that's what happened at the time. I mean, it was of its time. And I think these young people had a wonderful understanding of that the motivations of these people were of their time. Their actions were of their time. Hopefully we'd have different ones today. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you, that was absolutely fabulous. And I have a comment and a question. So the comment is, I was teaching a course in a liberal arts university outside of Delhi, and it was on empire and beyond. And I thought, how am I going to teach 100 engineers, it was mostly engineers and scientists, about Irish history and empire? And actually used some of the films that Ruth was talking about earlier, but the RTE it was a 3-episode documentary. It was a fabulous way of exciting an audience who knew nothing about Ireland. And I think the resonances, particularly with an Indian audience, were extremely strong. And it's simply just a little bit of feedback. But my question actually is a conversation we began yesterday at breakfast about the next project. And maybe, I don't know if you're at liberty to talk a little bit about it, because I think it's extremely exciting based on what I heard very briefly. But I suppose the lessons learned from this one as well. So as you reflect back and thinking about the future, you know, what the do's and the don'ts in terms of how you're conceiving. And last thing, how much did it cost to make?
A hell of a lot of money. I'll tell you exactly, it cost 3.1 million. That's a lot. Now, in filmmaking terms, it's nothing. In documentary making terms, it's huge. Put it this way, I made a documentary that we thought, oh my God, we've got a fortune to make this. It was 120,000. I thought, oh my God, what are we going to do with all this money? This, though, was conceived at a different level. It was for an international audience as well. I knew that's why we did it the way we did it. Like, I knew there was no way we could do this in Ireland alone. We did get some money from RTE. They put in like a small amount. We were able to leverage Section 481. And the rest of the money came from donations, from Irish Studies donors, you know, who basically bankroll our program over there. Well, exactly. Martin's up there on the thing. But the one thing about that is that they give the money to Notre Dame, who gives it to us. There was absolutely no editorial, no, you can't say this, we don't want that. Absolutely nothing like that. So it is really quite wonderful when you can get that. I mean, it's a private university. It's a non-profit university, so we were able to leverage that and leverage the goodwill that we had and people's reputations and things, you know. So that's what we hope to leverage that for the next one. And we had a great conversation yesterday morning. I hope we were going to continue it. What we'd like to do next is, there are 80 million people around the world who say they're Irish. 40 million in the US alone. Now, what does that mean? Some of these people were born in Ireland, but obviously not 70 million of them. There could be 5 generations away, and they're still saying, oh yeah, we're Irish. And particularly in the States, you get it. Is that accent Irish? Oh yeah, I'm Irish. My granny was from, you know. So what defines, why do people say they're Irish? What is it about being Irish that people want to be that, whether they are or not, you know? And if they want to be, well, yeah, it's okay. We can afford to have them, right? But like, for example, in China, you know, which is notoriously, you know, they let the Green Wall be painted green on St. Patrick's Day. They had an Irish military thing marching down Tiananmen Square. I mean, they don't do that for every country. So what is it about this little tiny island that engenders that sort of goodwill? Oh, you're Irish, you know? What is it? Now, we've done awful things ourselves as well. So really what I want to do is basically ask those kinds of questions. Who are we? And then using contemporary scholarship from archaeology, genetic anthropology, all this stuff. Who are we? Where did we come from? And then where did we go? So there's been a constant coming and going. The impact of us being an island, you know, what does that... So really it's a six-parter that will trace us from the beginnings as an island, the comings of the first and the Neolithic stuff, all those bare bones from 10,500 years ago, all that new stuff that's coming up to light now, about the earliest inhabitants, all the new research work about the Celts, the Celtic world, what does that mean? And then to follow really almost the history of the world through the prism of the Irish. So that's what I was talking to you about, Jane, was the early modern world, you know, but obviously before that the medieval world, the Irish monks and the islands of saints and scholars, which actually was true. We think, you know, it's... But actually, they were the contribution of the Irish to the early medieval Europe was immense. They were philosophers, they were teachers, and they were also Europeans. And then, of course, Irish, the New World, the beginnings of the New World, it's quite a fascinating story. So I want to tell that in 6 episodes, basically, and the feature, 6 hours, yeah, my God. So we're just beginning to develop this now. So I'm just beginning to speak to people like Jane, who I sincerely hope will be one of our major contributors, and many other people around in the audience here. And but again, it's to take, there's been a recent history of France, I think, written, where they look at France, not in the old-fashioned way, not in this insular way. You know, we always look at the history of a country in this kind of very insular way. And even Dalriada, for goodness sake, was trans-insular in that sense. So there's a bit of Ireland and Scotland, or certainly a Gaelic civilization. So I've just lost my train of thought. What was I saying there? Yeah, I'm frightening myself for thinking about this project, really. But yeah, but I said, but certainly we'll be again trying to get the best of scholars, but also not just scholars in this one. I think here, people like Alice McDermott, the Irish-American writer, Thomas Keneally in Australia, people like that. And also our new migrants. 20% of people living in Ireland were not born there. 17% of people born in Ireland, over 15, don't live there. So that's enormous. I mean, those figures are enormous, you know. Dublin Bus have done an anti-racism thing. They said their drivers come from 80 different countries in Dublin Bus. 30% of them from abroad, from 80 different countries. So how do they become Irish? Are they Irish? What does that mean? What will that mean in 10 years? So we need to go from year dot up to the present day, asking those questions and contextualizing Ireland in terms of world history and world movements.
So last question is Aditya's.
Well,
I want to thank you for the film. It was really very moving, and as Jane said, that especially for any people who've had to fight for freedom, I think this film resonates, and that's why it resonates all over the world. So that is my response as a viewer of the film, number one. Secondly, obviously the research that has gone into it, particularly from the Irish movement as part of it, is really very commendable. And after this, I hate to be now dissecting, after being so inspired by the movie, I hate to be dissecting it as a historian. But since we are having a discussion, you'll forgive me for doing that. You know, what began to jar was when you suddenly make a shift and say that, what is the impact of this in the rest of the world? And bang, 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 there are 3, 4 images, and the images of India do not just fit at all. What did India get out of the Irish movement? Certainly not 1916, because about a century before that, in 1857, there was an uprising far bigger, which was much more brutally suppressed. And India was certainly not learning from that. No, I just want to finish this. Sure. What India was learning from is the line that I would like to draw from what Jürgen was saying, was that every revolution, every movement is preceded by often nearly half a century of intense intellectual activity. it is from that India was drawing. It is the Home Rule League, for example, from which India was drawing. So I think, when you do this massive 6 episode thing, it would be probably appropriate, to try and see the linkages with other movements in as sophisticated a manner as you've done it for Ireland itself.
Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree with you more. Actually, we do try. People say that television is a bad medium for history because it oversimplifies. Well, like you have 86 minutes, do you know what I mean? Now, in the 3-parter, we do go much more into the whole Indian, the Irish-Indian, I suppose the similarities and differences between Irish and Indian national struggles. And of course, Tagore and Yeats. Tagore was hugely important to the Irish, to the cultural nationalists in Ireland. Padraig Pearse. Tagore staged one of Pearse's plays in his school. And likewise, Pearse staged one of Tagore's plays called The Post Office, interestingly enough, in Dublin, in students from St. Enda's in the Abbey. So the links are huge. And then later, of course, the Bengali revolutionaries. But you're absolutely correct and right. And that's something that, for example, and unfortunately in that dreadful mutiny, there were Irish people there in the service of the British Empire, as there were Indians in the service of the British Empire. So again, to look at those complex, we really do have to tell the story in as complex a way as the medium will allow us, So, there are compromises involved. So rather than not mention India at all, we at least wanted to say, do you know what? Other countries also rebelled against the British Empire. And maybe they saw this as some sort of inspiration.
Sorry, Adriana, but I have to stop here. I would like to thank a lot Briona, the originator, producer, writer of this film. And also I would like to thank our host, Patricia Mora, for receiving us here. And I think that this is a good way of, as being one of the last activities, I would say, of our cultural trauma symposium. And I would like to thank a lot the members of the Brazilian Association of Irish Studies that are here, all present, colleagues from different universities that came from Brazil, north of Brazil, Tocantins, and so so afterwards she will come and talk with you. Also the south, Rio Grande do Sul, Florianópolis, so Curitiba. So we have not only our colleagues coming from the 9 universities that are part of this project, but also from the Brazilian Association of Irish Studies that are more or less spread all around Brazil. So I would like to thank all of you a lot, and I will not say goodbye, on the contrary, we will continue being together, and then we are going to have dinner, so those of us who would like to join us, and tomorrow to go to the Engenho, that's say the archaeological site, that is the a museum of USP, also in Santos. So you are all much welcome. And then I think that this is the moment to say not goodbye, but welcome forever here. This is your house, okay? Thank you, and thank you for your time.
I just want to thank you to receive. I think that's so important at the university, this kind of exchange, meeting, when you have people from cinema and another readers. And well, I hope to have more this kind of meetings, receive you. It was great. It's very good for the students, for us, because they learn a lot of things that are not so close. And it's so important to discuss in our days, mainly in our days, always, but now we are not in a good moment, this kind of subjects related to freedom. So thank you very much for the opportunity.